Hello and welcome. My name is Frances Billinghurst, Witch, Chief Magic Maker, and founder of the Temple of the Dark Moon here in Adelaide, South Australia. I'm also a bit of a prolific writer. I have 4 books under my belt to date, and in March 2021, Encountering the Dark Goddess, A Journey into the Shadow Realms will be published through Moon Books, so I'm rather excited about that. What I'm wanting to talk to you today about is naturally the Dark Goddess, and in particular working with the various aspects that come under that umbrella with respect to shadow work. So firstly, let's start at the beginning and answer who is the Dark Goddess and why is she important. In order to do this, we need to look at what we mean by dark. And up until fairly recently, and by that I mean probably about 10 or so years ago, anything that was deemed dark, by and large, had and still was at that stage being shunned or ignored by the modern pagan community. This may have been due to Christian hang-ups that were still existing, which have actually infiltrated our Western society. But who really knows? We still see it today in the movies where the good guys wear white, bad guys still wear black or drive black cars. So it's sort of still enhancing that belief that black or darkness means something bad, evil, or negative. And this is despite, in nature, blackness or darkness has a whole completely different concept. It's within the dark skies at night that we get to see and appreciate the beauty of the stars and the cosmic activity. It's deep within Mother Earth, the darkness there, that seeds germinate in readiness to spring forth in the warmer weathers. And it's also in the darkness of night that while our body and our minds are at rest, while we're sleeping, our cells regenerate, rejuvenate. We're reborn again, so to speak, basically. And I also feel a little bit ironic that darkness or black has this negative connotation because the colour itself is an absorption or contains all colours. White, on the other hand, this sort of colour that's deemed as good and nice, is absorption, is sort of absence of all colours. It repels the colours. Yet our culture still shuns the darkness. Could be the unknown factor. Could be something that we feel fearful and insecure of this unknown quality. I'm pleased to say that since about 10 years ago, the concept of darkness has begun to change, and a lot of the deities, gods and goddesses that once were deemed dark and untouchable have almost been reawakened. There's a new following of them. We've seen this in particular of Hecate, and thankfully there have been people out there who have provided information, valuable information, correcting the misconstrued concepts of her that we in the 70s, 80s, and even the early 90s saw her as a crone, an old wizened woman, where she's never been depicted like that in ancient writing. She's always been depicted as a maiden. And now we're getting all this research coming through, all these resources, and often written by devotees of Hecate, sort of encouraging us to rethink how we view her, and that's fantastic. When we come to talk about the shadow self, this is a concept that by and large can be coined back to psychoanalyst Carl Jung, and he classified the dark, neglected side of our personality as the shadow. Those aspects that we hide, that are ignored and rubbished, feared, and we consider unworthy, largely due to other people's or society's expectations. But ignoring something doesn't make it go away, doesn't make it disappear. All that happens is that these aspects, these issues remain unresolved and are pushed deeper and further back into our subconscious, where they remain until they decide to make their presence known, often manifesting as fears, phobias, mental or emotional issues again, and the like. And there's also another aspect to the shadow, and these are our talents that we tend to ignore too, especially as we grow up and we may have been told that we're too good at this, or girls shouldn't be good at maths, So we sort of dumb ourselves down to fit in, to be more sociable, to not upset or stand out from the crowd too much. And these also get pushed into our subconscious, where they can manifest as issues, as conditions as we grow up and move our way through adulthood. So a lot of the shadow work is coming back to what they call as the root cause. Why do we have these insecurities as adults? And often it stems from something that's happened to us in childhood. How we've been treated, how we've been encouraged to live our lives, to not rock the boat, to not stand out, not to be too brainy, or we may have been told that we're always stupid because we just learn or do things differently. As a pagan and someone who's very connected with mythology and deities as a whole, I turn to the concept of what I call darker deities. And these are the gods and goddesses from mythology that usually relate to being resident in the underworld. They are the soul stealers. The wild hunt seems to come to mind when I say that. And it's also the Celtic concept of basically reclaiming the soul. They are the rubbish collectors, the scavengers. They challenge us. They are the initiators like Baba Yaga. They are the destroyers. However, they're also the creators, the rejuvenators. And they often go and do the bidding or do the negative deeds on behalf of somebody else. And I suppose even in the Christianity and the Bible, Satan comes to mind in Job, where he was doing God's dirty work, so to speak, testing Job and his devotion to God. So using that as an example, that's sort of what the dark goddesses and gods do for us. They're often placed outside normality, doing their own things, rebel, without even intending to be so. And it's important to keep in mind when we keep starting to label anything that's divine, that these so-called rules are by and large humanized concepts that we have projected onto aspects of the divine, largely for our own security blankets, so we can understand this whole concept. As in the greater scheme of things, anything that's divine is neither good or bad. It's neither dark or light. It just is. It's just like magic. It just is. It's how we perceive it, what we need to draw from it, what's reflected from us onto this higher power, force, whatever you wish to call it. When we humanize deities, we sort of view them as making up characteristics that are very much like ourselves. They're dark aspects, they're light aspects. And if you look at it sort of introspectively, all deities, when we humanize them, have both these qualities. Aphrodite comes to mind in particular, or Venus, depending if you're a Greek or Roman pantheon follower. This goddess, or say Aphrodite, is the love goddess. It's the one that we go to when we want to bring love or affection to our lives, but she's also the one who makes us cry and long of a broken heart or unacquainted love or anything like that. She's the same character, the same deity. It's just the different aspects of her that we often overlook. When it comes to the dark goddess, and I'll just sort of continue talking about her as opposed to the god, they can appear in our lives uninvited at rather inconvenient times. As I said, they sort of beat to their own drums. And they're here to pick us up and shake us when we've gotten too complacent or off the path that our soul has determined for us. And if they've got work to do, well, then they just simply don't mess around. They cut straight to the chase. And even from a more devotional side, they rather have a sort of extreme form of nurturing, sort of tough love, and they don't wrap you up in cotton wool at all. They like to change the rules whenever they feel like, often resulting in us feeling like we've lost control of our lives. But there's always a lesson, and that lesson is total surrender, possibly to a power that's greater than us. So they remind us our place in the world. And that can be a bit scary, a bit unsettling, especially when we're trying to keep body, mind, soul together and deal with all the mundane stuff without feeling or losing the plot completely. But having said that, it is not uncommon to realise that they have our back. And while they might seem like they're not there holding our hand, and when things start spinning out of control, they are always there. It's usually us who is blocking them in helping us, because we're hanging on to something that, from their higher perspective, we need to release. And this is what we are required to do, is complete surrender and trust in the process, which can be extremely difficult to do. Having said all that, everybody's experience with the Dark Goddess, deity in general, is very individualistic. There's no such thing as one size fits all. There's so many contributing factors. How we view deity, our past experiences, our perception, even on metaphysical teachings, and spirituality, where we are in our soul's evolution, if we believe in that. How we even view or believe deity is. Do we believe in them? Well, they're just archetypes. How we perceive progression of the soul. Do we believe in that or not? And this work is extremely and deeply personal to us. Something that I've gone through, by and large, will not be the same as anybody else. So we can only talk about our own experiences and guide someone else through theirs. When I first started working with the Dark Goddess or Dark Deities, I honestly can't remember. I wouldn't say that I've had a natural calling, but maybe I have, I don't know. Because the earliest goddess I do recall trying, and I do mean trying, to align myself with was Artemis. Warrior maiden, basically, goddess of the wild animals, of the hunt, the vengeful maiden who turned one of her admirers into a stag for her hounds to hunt down and kill because he, perchance, stumbled upon her bathing. And she was very shortly replaced by Isis, the great Egyptian mother goddess everybody likes to think she is, but she also has a darker aspect, for it was her and her scorpions who poisoned Ra, the sun god, and she almost blackmailed him, I suppose you could term it as that, until he gave her his secrets of magic, and then she had the antidote for the poison. And then when you talk about Isis, you can't ignore her shadow self, or her sister Nemesis, who lurks in the shadows, seducing Osiris to be the mother of Anubis, the psychopomp of the underworld. So maybe there was a natural drawing in my life, I don't know. My own personal experience in magic in general saw also the exploration to the left-hand path, but that was interesting, understanding that concept. But I've always worked with deity, they seem to be my thing. Something to do with the myths. I've always enjoyed the mythology. I blame my mother for starting me off of that interest. Isis is my main goddess. However, she tends to share me with two others in particular, Kali and Ishkragul. Kali just simply appeared in my life. I don't know how or why. It may have been due to a talk by a local devotee probably about 15-20 years ago that I got interested in her, and the fact that she's sort of what I call a living goddess, because there's a living devotional aspect to her. A living culture with the Hinduism. She has an altar outside in my garden. She has a neglected space inside my temple space. I've never found her terrifying. She's never really scared me. I might get the cosmic fry pan hit over my head if I continue on like that, but I think we show mutual respect for each other. From my personal experience with her, I know she doesn't take shit. She'll cut through the chase again. If you want something removed from your life, she is the one to do it. But don't go crying to her afterwards if the result is not what you had initially envisaged. And just like any deity, really, they see things their way, not necessarily how we see things. When it comes to Ishkragul from ancient Sumer, again, I don't really know. She just was there. I recall seeing an exhibition on ancient Mesopotamia in Melbourne, I don't know, 8-9 years ago, and got interested in trying to find out more about Mesopotamia and the gods there. That didn't result to left-hand path, demonic worship, or space cadet material, which a lot of the Mesopotamian stuff, especially in the pagan arena, seems to be, or it's very dry academic books. Poor Ishkagul comes out second best, especially if you are a reader of Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth by Diane Wilstein and Samuel Kramer, which is probably a standard book for most people starting to get into the Inanna Ishkagul descent story. They're working with the Dark Goddess. In there, Ishkagul has sort of been depicted, or people have interpreted her as old and ugly and jealous and barren. Yet in the myths, she's never been described at any of those. In fact, she isn't really described at all for what we have available for us today. So I honestly don't know how she's been perceived as that. Could possibly just be this connection that we tend to have with the underworld. Anything that's connected with the underworld has to be old and ugly. But in the initial pre-Inanna stories, she's almost like a sort of a kore, a maiden who gets snatched from the surface by a dragon. Then when her brother goes into the underworld to retrieve her, allegedly, or he comes back, there are a couple of seeds, which he then plants later along the banks of the Euphrates as the Hupalipra tree. And in a later Inanna story, this is the tree that Lilith resides in, who is another dark goddess. So we don't know what happened to Ishkagul. We don't know why she's residing in the underworld, staying there as the queen. Ker, or Ka, the dragon who snatched her, sort of disappears from the story. We only hear of her again when Inanna decides to descend. This is the famous story when Gilgalana, the ball of heaven, is killed. And we find out, though it's not mentioned a lot in this book, or people don't see that point of view or perspective, they miss the point that Gilgalana is actually Ishkagul's husband. So these are the funeral rites that are going on, and the reason he got killed was Inanna took a fancy to this mortal hero, Gilgamesh, but he didn't, just trying to think of the word now, he sort of shunned her sexual advances. So she got upset and a bit annoyed with that, so she demanded that her honour should be maintained and defended, and demanded that the ball of heaven goes down to fight Gilgamesh, and ended up that Gilgalana gets killed. So that sort of gives a bit of a backstory why Ishkagul gets rather annoyed and angry, I guess, with this unwanted guest. Some people say it's her sister, even though she predates Inanna, turning up, banging on her front door on the first of the 7 gates, demanding that she wants, or demands that she gets allowed entrance into the underworld. Now, if you're not only, you're in deep mourning, as Ishkagul is, for the loss of your beloved, and then not only some unwanted guest arrives to almost be a spectator, but the person whose actions contributed to the death of your beloved, I'm quite sure you'll be pissed off, just like Ishkagul was. I know I would. And so clearly Inanna needed to be taught a lesson, and she was. At each gate she had to remove an item of her finery, of her status, that she had put on specifically to attend these rites, almost to rub it in. And as she progressed down into the underworld through the 7 gates until she was totally humbled. She was naked and bent low, and then she was hung on a meat hook for 3 days, 3 nights to think about things. And as we keep getting reminded in the story that the ways of the underworld are perfect, should not be questioned. And I think that's important when it comes to looking at the dark goddesses, that their work is important, cannot be questioned. They're not there to barter with you. They're there to do something, to remind us again and again that something needs to be done, that we need to address something. We just can't keep ignoring or sweeping something under the rug, or we may have only half-heartedly or attempted to deal with something. We haven't finished the job. And our problem is that we have this fixation with lightness, with surface, with superficial stuff, with image and reputation and the need to impress and to please, and we even hide our vulnerability. We are not allowed to be weak, what's seen as a weakness. So we put on all these fronts, all these layers, all these veneers, and they make us feel good and comfortable and secure, and we find our place in the world, which is equally as artificial and superficial as this image that we're projecting out there. And it's getting, more and more abundant with social media such as Instagram, where everything is image, image, image. And if you don't fit the image that somehow is being perceived as the norm, well, then you're shunned. And it's interesting with the COVID-19 that's happening at the moment, how we are now having to strip back these layers. And we're being reminded as to what is actually important. But the truth, or the test, would be whether we've actually learned anything at all after these last 3 or 4 months, when things go back to relatively normal, whatever that means. We're living in a house where the walls are cracked, but all we're doing is painting over the walls, putting more wallpaper over the wallpaper. We're no longer taking responsibility of fixing what is the foundation that really needs to be fixed, until all of a sudden we have no choice. Then we have to strip back these layers. And this is what the Dark Goddess does. She strips back the layers that we have carefully wrapped around ourselves, sort of like pass the parcel. And she strips us back, exposing us to the bone. But in doing that, she then has a foundation where she can scrape clean of all this stuff that we've sort of projected onto ourselves, or have had projected onto ourselves. And then she can build us up again. And she keeps doing that until we take note, because it's not a temporary fix, until we're stripped of all our bad habits. And she will appear again and again until we learn the lessons, until we take note at a deep soul level. And her message, and working with her, as she goes through all the labels and the humanized concepts, and it's messy and it's cathartic and it's painful and it's nurturing. And our souls get a chance to release and release and release, and the world gets turned upside down and it turns to crap, and we think we're alone. And then bang, there's another wave and we're off again. It's almost like an out-of-control roller coaster. And when we think we've reached the end, we then realise we're only at the beginning. And our ride with her teaches us how best to guide the obstacles, because we're humans operating in a mundane plane with other humans, and life is messy. Life isn't perfect. And we ride the waves, and that's the main lesson that she's teaching us, is to ride the waves, don't fight against them. And I view my own journey like that. I'm like a cork bobbing in the endless ocean of uncertainty. And sometimes the waves just a gentle rock. And sometimes there's whirlpools, and sometimes there's storms. But like a cork, I keep rising to the surface and continue bobbing till the next wave comes along. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I've got this book out, Encountering the Dark Goddess, Journey into the Shadow Realms. It was initially based on the workshops I'd been running since 2006, but in writing it's taken on a form of its own. It's divided into 3 parts. The first, I look at the concept of darkness, the Dark Goddess, the shadow self, and why working with all these aspects is necessary, regardless of how you perceive deity. The second section in the book, I introduce you to 13 goddesses. Some are commonly associated with the darkness or with the underworld, others might not be. And with each, we look at their myths, and there's a task, usually meditation, to help establish your relationship or your connection with them. And these goddesses, from the top of my head, There's Oya, Lilith, Tiamat, Kali, Hecate, Medusa, Persephone, Morgan Le Fay, Ishgirgul, Hel, Sekhmet, Nephthys, Baba Yaga, and I'm missing one. I always seem to miss one. Medusa. I think I haven't said Medusa. Anyway, there's 13 of them. No doubt the one I'm missing will let me know. And then the final section, the third section, has a selection of workings of rituals, of spells, charms, the like, crafts, depending on what's needed, from incense making to puppet work, working with the dark moon, setting up boundaries, removing things from your life, all sorts of things that usually working with the dark goddess is associated with. And in closing, I just would like to add that the dark goddesses aren't vengeful. Not really. Some of them have been tarred with that, and in particular is Ishgirgul. And I say that because recently there's been a new book out on Ishgirgul and the Inanna story. And unfortunately, the author of that book has viewed Ishgirgul as being filled with vengeance and hatred towards Inanna. I'll say pissed off, but not necessarily hatred. And I'm just saying that due to my own personal experience with her, and Ishgirgul was never appeared like that to me. And if anything, seems to be rather miffed and confused as to why she's been labelled. And the final thing I'd just like to mention is that the very first book that I picked up, and my copy is yellow-edged, is this book. I bought this in 1999. It's still available today. Mysteries of the Dark Moon. The Healing Power of the Dark Goddess by Demetra George. And though it has a little bit of a sort of written from a perspective of astrology, and it talks about working with the moon, but very interesting book. It was the first book that got me started in my collection about the Dark Goddess that came across. It said 1999. Say that. So if you're looking at the healing powers of the Dark Goddess, this book's still available. And as I said, March next year, 2021, look out for Encountering the Dark Goddess, a Journey into the Shadow Realms. Until then, thank you and blessed be.